Sold! The gavel slammed. We have a final bid. And they surged forward, like hungry lions, reaching, grabbing, already calculating payment. She didn't scream, because in that moment, she understood this wasn't an auction. It was a hunt, and she was prey. That was the moment she knew. This night would change everything. Click on the subscribe button and drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from. And if you love dark stories that linger, stay with me, because this is where Elara's story begins. Some nights don't begin, they descend. Heavy, certain, already decided before anyone in the room understands why the air feels wrong. This was one of them. The chandelier above her head glittered like it had never witnessed anything ugly. Crystal, catching gold light. Polished floors, reflecting silence. Everything in the room was beautiful. That was the first lie. Elara stood in the centre of it all, wearing a dress that didn't belong to her. Soft fabric. Too expensive. Too deliberate. The kind of dress chosen by someone who wanted damage to look elegant. Around her, people spoke in low voices, not loud enough to echo, not soft enough to feel kind. Measured conversations, careful laughter, glasses clinking like punctuation marks at the end of sentences no one would repeat outside those walls. No one looked shocked. That was the second lie, because rooms like this don't host accidents. They host decisions, and every person there had already decided what she was worth. She kept her hands clasped in front of her, not trembling, still, the way prey learns stillness when movement invites attention. No one had explained things clearly. They never do. They use softer words, arrangement, opportunity, protection, words that dissolve when held too tightly. But truth has a weight language can't fully disguise. And tonight, truth sat heavy in her chest. She wasn't here to be introduced. She was here to be transferred. The realization had come slowly, not all at once, like cold, seeping through fabric. Gradual, unavoidable. Across the room, a man laughed. Too loud, too practiced. Someone else adjusted their cufflinks. Another checked their watch. Normal gestures, ordinary movements. That was the third lie, because nothing about this night was ordinary. She shifted her weight slightly. Heels unfamiliar. Floor too smooth. Somewhere deep inside her, something ancient and wordless stirred. Instinct. The same instinct that wakes animals seconds before the forest goes quiet. She didn't know why her pulse had gone steady instead of fast, why fear hadn't erupted into panic, only spread slowly, deliberately, like ink in water. The doors opened again, not loudly, they didn't need to be. The room adjusted anyway. It was subtle, almost polite, but she felt it. The way conversations paused half a breath too long. The way posture straightened without instruction. Power rarely announces itself. It rearranges the air. She didn't turn immediately. Some part of her already knew that whatever walked in next would change the direction of her life permanently. And the body, when it understands something irreversible is approaching, sometimes buys itself one last second of ignorance. But silence deepened. And curiosity is a crueler force than fear. So she turned. He didn't look like the others. That was the first thing. No performance. No forced ease. While the rest of the room shimmered with rehearsed wealth, he stood inside it like something carved from a quieter material. Still, composed, uninterested in being liked. Dark suit. No visible effort. No unnecessary movement. But it wasn't the clothes. It was the gravity. Some people enter rooms, others tilt them. And from the moment her eyes found him, the floor beneath her certainty shifted one quiet degree. He wasn't looking at the crowd, wasn't scanning faces, wasn't participating in whatever performance this night required. He was looking at her, not casually, not curiously, precisely, like someone verifying the last detail of a long calculation. Her breath caught, not loudly, just enough to remind her she still needed air. Something about the way he looked at her felt wrong, not cruel, worse, certain, like recognition without introduction, like the end of a sentence she hadn't realised she was living inside. He stepped further into the room, and conversations bent around him without protest. No one rushed forward. No one questioned his presence. Power like that doesn't ask permission. It assumes it was expected. A man near the front straightened quickly. Too quickly. A host, maybe. Or someone who had been pretending to be important until something genuinely important arrived. They exchanged a few quiet words she couldn't hear. Didn't need to. Because whatever was being said wasn't negotiation. It was confirmation. And suddenly, the air changed temperature. Not physically, but undeniably. The way a storm changes pressure before the first drop falls. She felt it in her ribs, in the space behind her eyes, in that fragile place where hope and denial had been holding hands all evening. And then it happened. Small, almost invisible, but irreversible. The host nodded once, sharp, final, and the room exhaled. A decision had been made, not loudly, not publicly, but completely. Her fingers tightened instinctively, a movement so slight no one else would have noticed, except him. His gaze flickered downward for half a second, noticing, cataloguing, understanding more than she had said. And then, for the first time that night, he moved directly toward her. Not rushed, not theatrical, inevitable, each step quiet against the polished floor, measured in a way that made time stretch thin between them. She should have looked away. Most people would have. But something older than logic held her still. The same force that keeps people watching, waves they know will crash. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the stillness in his eyes. Not emptiness, not warmth, something else, something that looked disturbingly like memory. Up close, the room disappeared. The noise, the light, the watching strangers, all of it fell away until there was only the strange, unbearable feeling of being seen by someone who had been looking for you longer than you had been looking for yourself. He didn't smile, didn't soften, but he didn't look cruel either. Just resolved. Like a man who had already finished a long journey and was now standing at the final door. "You're quiet," he said. His voice wasn't cold. It was calm in a way that made cold unnecessary. She didn't answer. Couldn't, because something inside her had started unravelling in thin, invisible threads. Not fear, recognition, and recognition, when it arrives without warning, is one of the most destabilising things a person can feel. He watched her for another second. Then, almost gently, he said something that fractured the night completely. "Still afraid of the rain?" The world didn't stop. Rooms like that never do. Glasses still touched. Fabric still whispered. Somewhere, someone laughed softly at something trivial. But inside her, time collapsed inward. Rain. The word didn't echo in her ears. It detonated. Not as a memory, as a door. And somewhere deep in the locked architecture of a past she had spent years folding smaller and smaller, just to survive carrying it, something ancient and unfinished shifted violently awake. Because there are only two kinds of recognition in this world. The kind you welcome, and the kind that arrives like a ghost dragging your name behind it. And in that glittering room where she had just been sold without a sound, she realised with quiet, rising horror. This wasn't the first time he had found her. Perfect. We stay in the fire now. Present tension first. Flashbacks woven in. Rain. The room hadn't changed. Music still drifted somewhere behind velvet walls. Crystal still caught light. People still existed in the background, like expensive scenery. But inside her, the night split open. Rain. A simple word. Common. Harmless. It shouldn't have meant anything. But meaning doesn't ask permission. It returns when it wants. Her throat tightened before she understood why. Not panic. Recognition moving too fast for logic to catch. She swallowed. Forced her voice to exist. I don't know what you mean. It came out quieter than she intended. Careful. Measured. The kind of denial built from years of surviving questions that were safer unanswered. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes deepened. Not disappointment. Confirmation. Like a man watching a lock behave exactly the way he expected. That's all right, he said softly, not dismissive, certain. Like memory didn't require cooperation, and that certainty terrified her more than cruelty would have, because cruelty is easy to name. This wasn't. This was something older, something patient, something that had waited long enough to forget what doubt felt like. She should have stepped back, created distance, space, air, but her body didn't move, not because she wasn't afraid, because fear had tangled itself with something far more dangerous, a feeling she couldn't afford to identify. He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way people study places they used to live, noticing what time had rearranged, what it hadn't. You still do that, he murmured. Her pulse stuttered. Do what? His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, still clasped in front of her, too tight, knuckles pale against soft fabric. Pretend stillness makes things easier. The words landed, gently, which made them worse, because truth spoken quietly has nowhere to hide. Something inside her chest recoiled, not at him, at the accuracy. That was the most frightening part. Not that he was here, not that he knew the rain, that he was right. She finally took a small step back, the first movement she'd allowed herself since he walked in. Air returned in thin, careful breaths. You're mistaken, she said, stronger now, not convincing, but functional. The room rushed back in around them slightly. Sound, light, distance. For a moment, it almost felt survivable again. Then he said her name, not loudly, not dramatically, just once, and the world collapsed inward all over again, because he didn't say it the way strangers do. He said it the way people say things they've carried for years, carefully, like it might bruise if handled roughly. She stared at him, really stared this time, not at the suit, not at the composure, not at the terrifying calm stitched into every movement, at the eyes, and something impossible cracked open. Not a full memory, not yet, just fragments, a window, rain against glass, a voice in the dark. You should sleep when it rains. Her breath hitched, small, involuntary, but he saw it. Of course he did. And for the first time since he entered the room, something flickered across his face. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter, something dangerously close to ache. It vanished quickly, buried under years of discipline. But she had seen it, and that made everything worse, because monsters aren't supposed to look like they remember being human. She started, but language was abandoning her now. Words, scattering like birds, startled into the sky. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not like this. She had built her life carefully, quietly, deliberately small enough to survive, and suddenly, without warning, the past had walked into a chandelier-lit room and spoken her name like it had never stopped belonging to him. "No," she whispered, not to him, to the memories rising too fast, too sharp, too alive. His gaze softened by a fraction, and that was when she understood something with cold, rising certainty. He wasn't confused. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Every wall she had built inside herself trembled, because recognition was no longer one-sided, and some truths are more terrifying when they begin to belong to you too. "I think you should sit," he said quietly. Not a suggestion, not a command, something stranger. Concern shaped like control. She shook her head immediately. Too fast. No. The word escaped before pride could filter it, because sitting meant yielding, and something deep inside her understood that yielding, even slightly, would change the shape of this night forever. A faint exhale left him. Not frustration. Adjustment. Like a man recalculating a path he had already walked 1,000 times in his mind. "Still stubborn, Elara," he said softly, and suddenly, a flash. Not gentle, violent in its clarity. A backstep, cold concrete, a piece of bread breaking in half between small hands. Her stomach dropped. The room tilted. She grabbed the edge of a nearby table before she realised she was moving. Crystal rattled faintly under her fingers. Memory wasn't returning slowly anymore. It was breaking surface like something that had been drowning for years and had finally found air. Nobody knew her by that name anymore. Nobody. But... "No," she whispered again. But this time, the denial sounded weaker, because somewhere between the rain in her mind and the quiet devastation in his eyes, truth was assembling itself without her permission. He noticed the table, the way she leaned into it, the fracture lines spreading beneath her composure, and something inside him shifted visibly. Not outwardly. Anyone else would have missed it. But the air around him tightened, protective, dangerous, like a blade remembering its purpose. "I didn't come here to hurt you," he said, low, even, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable beneath the calm. Not softness, not mercy, something far more frightening. Restraint, the kind that exists only when something powerful has chosen, deliberately, not to unfold. Her chest rose sharply, because suddenly, the truth standing in front of her wasn't just impossible. It was worse. It was real. Not a ghost. Not a memory. Not a mistake stitched together by a mind under pressure. Real. Alive. Watching her like distance had never been strong enough to erase her from his world. "You?" Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. Tried again. "You're not..." The word refused to form. Childhood. Past. Gone. None of them fit anymore, because the boy she remembered didn't exist, and whatever stood in front of her now had spent years becoming something else entirely. His eyes held hers, steady, unforgiving in their patience, and on that unbearable silence, filled with chandeliers and strangers and the quiet echo of a promise made in the rain, she realised the most terrifying truth of all. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fate being poetic. This was intention. And somewhere deep in the part of her that had always known survival required honesty, even when honesty hurt, a final understanding began to bloom like frost across fragile glass. She hadn't just been sold tonight. She had been found. And something in the way he was looking at her said this wasn't the end of a story. It was the part he had been building toward all along. She stared at him like the floor had shifted. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He didn't blink. "I should." No hesitation. No apology. That scared her more than anger would have. "You don't understand," she said quickly. "This isn't—" "I understand enough." The way he said it ended the argument before it began. Not loud. Final. Her fingers tightened around the table. "You shouldn't have come," she said again. Softer now. A mistake. The moment the plea slipped out, something in his expression hardened. Not cruel. Resolved. "I told you once," he said quietly. "I wouldn't forget." Her breath caught. That sentence didn't belong in this room. It belonged to rain, to a broken hallway, to a boy gripping her hand like the world was ending. "You were a child," she whispered. He nodded once. "I was." Then he held her gaze. "But I meant it. No drama, no emotion, just truth." And it landed hard. She searched his face desperately, like she could still separate the boy from the man. She couldn't. The patience was the giveaway. The years were in it. He hadn't forgotten. He had waited. A cold realization slid into her chest. "You can't be serious," she said. "I am." Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Tight. She shook her head slowly. "This doesn't make sense." "It does," he said. "You just don't want it to." Her stomach dropped, because deep down, she already knew that was true. He took a small step closer. That was all it took. The space between them disappeared. "You think this is coincidence?" he asked. She didn't answer. He didn't need her to. "I don't build coincidences," he said calmly, and that was when the fear finally settled in. Not loud, deep, because he wasn't guessing. He wasn't hoping. He was certain. "You're lying," she said weakly. He shook his head once. "I don't lie about you, Elara." The way he said it made her chest tighten. Not obsession. Not madness. Conviction. That was worse. She swallowed. "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Small. Honest. And something in his face changed. Barely. But she saw it. "You stood in front of me," he said quietly. "When no one else did." Her heart stopped. The memory hit fast. Rain. Cold steps. Small hands. A boy looking at her like she had just rewritten the world. She tried to speak. Failed. "You think people forget things like that?" he asked. She couldn't answer, because suddenly she understood something she hadn't let herself see all night. He hadn't moved on. He had continued. Years. Distance. Everything. And still, he was here. "You built your whole life on that?" she whispered. "No," he said. Then after a beat, "I built it so I'd never lose you again." The words knocked the air out of her. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Her knees nearly gave, because in that moment everything rearranged. This wasn't a reunion. It was a conclusion. "You're insane," she whispered. "Maybe," he said calmly. Then he stepped closer, close enough that the room disappeared. "But I kept my promise." She felt it then, fully. Not confusion, not doubt, truth. This wasn't obsession born tonight. This wasn't fate being poetic. This was intention that had taken years to arrive. And now that it had, it wasn't leaving. "I never stopped coming back," he said softly. And that was the moment she understood. She hadn't just been sold tonight. She had been claimed by a promise that never died. The silence between them didn't last long, because the room started noticing. Not her. Him. Whispers spread slowly. Glances. Phones subtly lowered. The energy shifted. She felt it immediately. People weren't watching her anymore. They were watching him. And suddenly, she understood something she hadn't fully processed yet. This man wasn't just dangerous to her. He was dangerous. Period. A man in a navy suit approached carefully. Older, polished, the kind of man who had been confident all night. Until now. "Mr. Han," he said with a tight smile. "We didn't expect you in person. Mr. Han." The name hit the room like a dropped glass. Not loud, but final. Her stomach dropped, because the reaction was instant. Posture changed, voices lowered. Even the host straightened. No one questioned him anymore. They adjusted to him. He didn't look away from her when he replied, "I don't send people for things that matter." Calm, casual, but every word landed heavy. Things that matter. Her chest tightened. The older man laughed nervously. "Well, of course. We just thought—" "I know what you thought," he said, still watching her. No aggression, no raised voice. And somehow, that made it worse. Because power didn't need volume here. It just existed. The man cleared his throat quickly. "Yes, well, everything has been prepared, as requested." Requested! The word rang in her ears. Not arranged. Not discussed. Requested. And everyone had obeyed. She felt cold, all over. This wasn't a transaction he walked into. This was something he built. Her voice came out thin. "You planned this?" He finally looked at her fully. Yes. No hesitation, no apology, just truth. The room kept moving around them, pretending not to listen. But everyone was listening. Everyone always listens when power speaks plainly. "You can't just—" she started, but her voice faltered. He tilted his head slightly. "I can." And the worst part was, she believed him. Because nobody in that room looked like they would stop him. Not the host, not the buyers, not the men who had been laughing 20 minutes ago. They all looked careful now. A woman near the bar leaned toward another guest and whispered something urgently. A phone disappeared into a clutch. Someone quietly stepped farther away from them. Distance. People were creating distance. Not from her. From him. Her pulse spiked. "What did you do?" she whispered. His expression didn't change. "Secured what was mine." The words hit harder than anything else he'd said. Not loud, not emotional, certain. She shook her head immediately. "I'm not something you secure." A flicker crossed his eyes. Not anger. Correction. "I know." That threw her off completely. Before she could speak again, he added quietly, "You're something I protect." The sentence landed differently. Not ownership. Not exactly. Worse. Devotion wrapped in steel. Her throat tightened. "You don't get to decide that," she said. "I already did." Simple. Final. Like the decision had been made years ago, and tonight was just execution. The older man beside them shifted awkwardly. "Perhaps we should finalize the paperwork," he said carefully, eyes flicking between them. Paperwork. The word snapped her back into the present. This wasn't just emotional madness. This was legal, structured, signed, real. Her chest rose sharply. "You bought me," she said, the horror finally landing fully. The room went very still, because now it was spoken. Ugly, raw, true. He didn't flinch. Yes. No denial. No softening. Just honesty. And that honesty was more terrifying than any lie could have been. Her vision blurred for a second. Not from tears. From the sheer weight of it, all those years. All that distance. And it ended like this. A transaction. Under chandeliers. "You're insane," she whispered. "Maybe," he said calmly, then quieter. "But you're alive." That stopped her. Completely. Because suddenly, something shifted beneath the madness. Something darker. More real. He wasn't looking at her like a prize. He was looking at her like a survivor he had finally reached. "You think this saved me?" she asked, voice shaking now. His jaw tightened slightly. The first crack she had seen all night. "I know what would have happened if I didn't come," he said quietly, and for the first time, there was something dangerous in his voice. Not loud, not explosive, cold, the kind of cold that comes from knowledge, not imagination. Her breath caught because she realised something new, something worse. He wasn't guessing about her life. He knew it, which meant he had been watching. "How long?" she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Too long. Way too long. The room felt smaller suddenly. The lights too bright. The air too thin. "You don't get to rewrite my life," she said. But her voice wasn't steady anymore. He stepped closer. Not aggressive. Inevitable. "I didn't rewrite it," he said quietly. Then he looked at her in a way that made her chest tighten. "I made sure you survived it." And in that moment, surrounded by people too afraid to interrupt and silence too heavy to breathe through, she realised something that made fear curl deep in her stomach. This wasn't a man who found her tonight. This was a man who had been standing behind the worst moments of her life, making sure they never became fatal. And suddenly, the most terrifying thought of all slipped in. If this was what he was willing to do quietly, what would he do now that he finally had her? The room started emptying, not loudly, just fast. Conversations cut short, glasses abandoned, people suddenly remembering places they needed to be. No one wanted to stay near this anymore. Not the deal, not him. Within minutes, the chandelier-lit room felt bigger, quieter, dangerous. She noticed it. "They're leaving," she whispered. "They should," he said calmly. No emotion, like this was always the outcome. The host approached once more, nervous now. "Everything is signed," he said quickly. "We'll transfer the rest digitally." Mr. Han didn't even look at him. "Go!" That was it. One word. The man left immediately. No argument, no politeness. Just gone. Her stomach twisted. "You didn't even thank him," she said. "I don't thank people for doing what they're paid to do." Flat. Certain. She went quiet, because that sentence told her everything. This wasn't new to him. Power like this had history. Soon, they were alone. Just the two of them. And too much silence. Her chest rose slowly. "You cleared the room," she said. "Yes." No denial. No games. "Why?" His eyes didn't leave hers. "Because you won't lie to me when we're alone." Her pulse jumped. "I'm not lying." "You are." Immediate. Unfiltered. She swallowed. About what? About being afraid. The word hit hard. Because it was true, and he knew it. "I'm not afraid of you," she said quickly. He stepped closer. Too close now. "You should be," he said quietly. No threat, just fact. And somehow, that made it worse. Her back nearly hit the edge of the table. "You don't get to do this," she said. "Do what?" "This," she snapped. "Control everything. Show up after years and act like you..." "Like I what?" His voice dropped lower. Sharp now. "Like you own my life." Silence. Then, "I don't own your life." A beat. "I kept it alive." The words slammed into her. Heavy. Final. She shook her head. "That's not love." His jaw tightened. Who said anything about love? He didn't say it out loud, but she saw it in his eyes. This wasn't soft. This wasn't pretty. This was something else. "You watched me," she whispered. "Yes." No shame. No apology. "How long?" A pause. Then, "Long enough." Her stomach dropped. "You're sick." Maybe. Still calm, still honest. But your breathing, that shut her up, because he wasn't defending himself. He was stating outcomes. You don't get to decide that for me, she said. Weaker now. I already did, he replied, not loud, just irreversible. Tears burned her eyes suddenly, not from weakness, from the weight of it. You don't understand what you've done, she whispered. He stepped even closer. Now, there was nowhere to go. I do, he said quietly, and for the first time, his voice cracked. Barely. I was there the night they tried to sell you the first time. Her world stopped. What? The word barely existed. His eyes didn't leave hers. I was late, he said. Simple. Brutal. I fixed that mistake tonight. The room spun. Not metaphorically, actually, because suddenly everything made sense in the worst way. The protection, the watching, the control. This wasn't obsession that started tonight. This was a war he had been fighting alone. You're lying, she whispered. I wish I was. And that was the scariest part. He meant it. Every word, every year, every decision. All real. Her legs nearly gave out. He caught her, instantly, hands firm on her arms. Not gentle, not rough. Certain. Don't, he said quietly. She froze, because his grip wasn't possessive. It was protective. Like letting her fall wasn't an option. He allowed reality to have. You don't get to touch me, she whispered, but it lacked strength. His grip didn't tighten, but it didn't leave either. If I didn't, he said quietly, you wouldn't be standing. The sentence landed like a gunshot. Not loud, but permanent. She looked up at him slowly, and for the first time since this night began, she saw it clearly. Not the power, not the control, not the terrifying patience, the damage, years of it, buried deep, locked tight, all built around one unbreakable truth. He never left her story, even when she left his, and suddenly, the most dangerous realization of all settled into her chest. This wasn't a man who found her. This was a man who survived her absence. And people like that don't let go when they finally get you back. She didn't pull away, not because she wanted to stay, because her body had stopped knowing what leaving looked like. His hands were still on her arms, steady, warm, unmovable, not trapping her, holding her in place like the world itself might shift if he let go. You don't get to do this, she whispered. Do what? He asked quietly. Rewrite everything. His eyes didn't soften. I'm not rewriting anything. A beat. I'm finishing it. The words burned, because deep down, she understood. This night wasn't chaos. It was conclusion. You think this fixes anything? She asked. No. The honesty stunned her. He didn't hesitate. Didn't pretend. This doesn't fix what happened to you, he said. Then his voice dropped. But it makes sure it never happens again. The room felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to listen. You can't promise that, she said. I already have Elara. Not confidence, certainty. And suddenly, she was tired. Not physically. Bone-deep tired. Because arguing with him felt like arguing with gravity. You don't even know who I am anymore, she said quietly. That one slipped through. Raw. Real. It hit him. She saw it. A crack in the armour. Small. But there. His grip loosened slightly. Not letting go. Just adjusting. I know enough, he said. You don't, she whispered. Tears finally fell. Silent. Hot. I'm not that girl anymore. The sentence hung between them. Fragile. Terrifying. Because it was true. Years had carved her into someone else. Harder. Colder. Quieter. And for the first time that night, he looked shaken. Not visibly, but she felt it. I know, he said quietly. and that hurt more than denial would have, because he wasn't chasing a memory. He was choosing her as she was, broken edges and all. "I didn't come back for who you were," he said, soft, certain. "I came back for who survived." That broke something in her, completely, because no one had ever said it like that. Not with truth, not with weight. "You don't get to save me," she whispered. His expression changed. Not anger, something deeper. "I didn't save you," he said. Then, the line that changed everything. "I made sure you lived long enough to hate me for it." Her breath left her, gone, because suddenly everything made sense. The distance, the watching, the control. He never needed her gratitude. He just needed her alive. And that was worse. Much worse. "Why?" she whispered, not accusing, begging, because she needed something human to hold on to. His eyes finally broke, not weak, just honest. "Because you were the only person who ever chose me," he said quietly. The truth landed raw, unprotected, no power, no control. Just a boy who had never left that rainy hallway. And, for the first time, she saw him clearly. Not the empire, not the monster people whispered about. The promise. Still alive, still breathing, still standing in front of her after all these years. "You built all this," she whispered, voice shaking. "For a promise?" He didn't smile, didn't look proud, just tired. "Yes," one word, heavy enough to end wars. Silence swallowed the room, not peaceful, final, because there was nothing left to argue with, no lie to expose, no illusion to break, just truth standing there, refusing to soften itself. Her chest hurt, because suddenly she understood something terrifying. This wasn't obsession. It was devotion that had gone too far to turn back, and people like that don't stop. "Now what?" she asked quietly. The question neither of them had dared to touch all night. His answer came immediately. "Now you choose." Her heart stopped. "What?" His hands finally left her arms. Slowly, like letting go, cost something. "I found you," he said quietly. "I kept my promise." A beat. "But I won't cage you." That shook her more than anything else, because cages she understood. Chains made sense. Freedom from someone like him? That was terrifying. "If you walk away," he said calmly, "I won't stop you." The words sounded real, but something in his eyes betrayed the truth. Not a lie. Something worse. He would let her go, but it would destroy him. And they both knew it. "You'd really let me leave," she whispered. He held her gaze, unblinking. "Yes." No drama, no manipulation, just the most dangerous kind of love there is, the kind that gives you the knife and trusts you not to use it. Her chest cracked open, because suddenly the power had shifted, not to him, to her, and she had never been more afraid in her life. The silence stretched, heavy, endless. Then, a phone buzzed sharply on the table behind him. He didn't move, didn't look, but the sound cut through the moment like a blade. It buzzed again. Once, twice, urgent, relentless. Something dark flickered behind his eyes, gone in a second. But she saw it. "What is that?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Her stomach dropped. That doesn't sound like something that can wait. Still nothing, and suddenly she understood something cold and sharp. This night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something worse. "You're not done," she whispered. Not a question, a realization. His jaw tightened, just slightly, and in that tiny fracture, she saw it. The truth he hadn't said out loud. He found her, but the world that made him was still coming, And it wasn't gentle. "You should go home," he said quietly, not looking at the phone, looking at her. That scared her more than anything else. "Why?" she whispered. A long pause, then the final crack in the night. "Because if you stay," he said softly, "they'll know you matter." Ice flooded her veins, because that wasn't a lover speaking. That was a warning. And suddenly, the chandelier-lit room didn't feel safe anymore. It felt temporary, like the calm before something violent arrived. Her voice trembled. He didn't answer. Didn't have to, because in the distance, somewhere beyond velvet walls and polished lies, something had already started moving, and standing there, caught between the boy who never broke his promise and the man the world had clearly learned to fear, she realised the most dangerous truth of all. He wasn't the storm. He was the shelter. And storms like the one coming don't stop for love. And he thought, saving her would be enough. But some girls don't stay the same after the storm, because next time, she won't just be the girl he protected. She'll be the reason he goes to war, because finding her was the easy part, keeping her safe. That's where the war begins. Tap the subscribe button and next time, you'll see what happens when the people who fear him finally come for her.